This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, they're definitely one of the most magnificent animals on planet Earth, a beloved symbol, if you will, of the Canadian Rockies, and of course respected and revered around the world, the apex predator that is the grizzly bear. For years, grizzlies have been threatened species in the province of Alberta, but if you're paying attention to the news cycle, you've probably seen that grizzlies are back in the crosshairs. After nearly a 20-year ban on grizzly hunting in Alberta, the province has quietly lifted that ban that will allow hunters to target so-called problem grizzly bears that have had interaction with humans or livestock. Now, there's not been an announcement from the province nor the ministry responsible. This is something that's been flying under the radar since mid-June when it was first announced. But in this episode of Real Talk, we're going to connect with three different experts, bringing three different perspectives to the table. Is this the right move? Have we moved past threatened species status for the grizzlies? What is the right way to handle the so-called problem bears that the province says is responsible for a number of interactions with humans? 8 people killed by grizzlies, 62 grizzly maulings in the province of Alberta since 2005, and many more interactions with animals. It's not that this isn't an issue for landowners, for people that are exploring into the backcountry, but what belongs to the bears and what belongs to us? And if it comes to the legislative process for all of this, lawmaking, what's the right way to do it? Starting with consultation. We'll talk to John E. Marriott, a wildlife photographer, the former superintendent of Banff National Park, Kevin Van Tighem, and Dr. Sarah Elmeligi, who is the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis. She's also a PhD and a bear biologist. We're grateful to have you here with us for that conversation that's being made possible today by our friends at Relo. You can find them online at relo.ca. RELO.ca is where better real estate training starts. Relo's Alberta's top online real estate school for a few different reasons. Number one, they've got the instructors that know how to prepare you for your pre-licensing courses. They're going to make sure you're set up for success when it comes to writing that exam and getting certified. And the support continues once you've launched your career. You'll continue to be part of that ecosystem where that expert advice will help you get a leg up on the competition. You can learn more about signing up for those courses on their website. And of course, don't forget, save yourself a couple of $100 with that promo code Ryan100. If you sign up for the Alberta commercial or the Alberta residential real estate bundles, that promo Ryan100 will take $100 off each of them at relo.ca. Johnny Marriott is co-founder of the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy. He's a full-time professional wildlife photographer and a conservation advocate. He's an associate fellow with the International League of Conservation Photographers, and he's joining us from his home in beautiful Canmore, Alberta. John, you've long been, and I've told you this privately, long been one of my favorite follows on Instagram. This is your Real Talk debut. Happy to have you here. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. It's a real honor to be on here, although kind of wish this wasn't what we were talking about.
Yeah, this is lousy subject matter, to be sure. You might be one of the, I don't know anything about you personally, but I've seen the work that you create, and you might be one of the biggest fans, one of the biggest supporters, one of the biggest proponents of the defenders of the grizzly bear in North America or around the world. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, probably. I was very involved in getting the grizzly bear hunt banned in British Columbia, and have been a big advocate for grizzly bears for the last couple of decades. Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay, well, we'll talk policy here, and we'll, of course we can get into wildlife management principles, and we'll approach this from a number of different angles. But why don't we first just talk about the animal that we're talking about? What makes the grizzly so special? Why does it resonate with you?
I think for a number of reasons. When I first started photographing, this was back in the mid 90s, grizzly bears were quite hard to find in most of the province. They're at a population status where there wasn't a ton of them, particularly if you went outside of the national parks. And so there was a bit of an elusiveness there. And then there was always this, I'd grown up in British Columbia and Salmon Arm, and I remember when I was 12 years old fishing, going up this old logging road with my dad up Scotch Creek in the Shuswap Highlands, and walked down to the creek, and I found this huge track. And of course, being 12 years old, I thought, oh my gosh, Sasquatch. And that's what I'd been addicted to at that time. This was sort of very early 1980s. And we got back home and went over to the neighbor's house, and he was a big outdoorsman. And, my dad was telling him about this track we'd found. And he goes, oh, that must be a big old rogue grizzly bear. They used to be around here a lot. And, they kind of disappeared, and hoping that they come back. And instantly, just like that, my focus as a child was switched. And for the next, 40 years, grizzly bears have played a very large role in my life, both from the perspective of me going out and photographing them and making a living off them, leading photo tours to various places across Canada, and taking people with me to go and see these magnificent apex predators. But also just there's something very special about grizzly bears. They have individual personalities. They display emotions. They're really quite a wonderful animal. You can't predict what you're going to get with them every time you see one. And you've got all kinds of these different personalities that I think people have become familiar with. And, the most famous one that I've been lucky enough to have a bunch of encounters with is the boss here in Banff, who's the big dominant male. He's now 26 years old. He's been sort of the dominant male in Banff National Park for a good 15 years now. And one of the reasons he's been able to live to be 26 years old is because there is no hunting in the national park. And we're fortunate here in Alberta that hunting has been banned since 2006. So this recent news was really, for lack of a better word, a gut punch. But there were a lot of signs that this was coming. And I actually started predicting this back in 2022, that this is where we were headed and that there was going to be something like this, something snuck through the back door. And that is exactly what has happened here.
What was it that sort of triggered your spidey senses on that one? Why did you see this coming? What was happening?
Well, the first big thing was when Jay Honeyman, who was the grizzly bear, he was the human wildlife conflict specialist for Southern Alberta, and his real role was dealing with grizzly bear conflicts. That was what he did primarily. And he would go in. So for instance, say a rancher had, a couple of cattle killed, he would go in, he would investigate, he would figure out, was it actually grizzly bears? And if it was, what could you do to coexist with those bears? Are there places that in the future carcasses of dead cattle could be moved to where bears wouldn't come in and feed on them and get used to that taste? Was there electric fencing that could be done? So he looked at non-lethal ways to deal with reducing conflict risk. And he did that for all sorts of different things. So, whether livestock producers or people living rurally, that sort of thing. And in 2022, he retired, and the province did not fill his position. Now, they will say that they did. The spin is that they did. But Jay will be the first one to tell you that, no, they didn't. They don't do any of the stuff that I was doing. He kept records of all of the occurrences and what he did, and there hasn't been a single person doing that since. And interestingly, so that was sort of my first clue that, okay, something's going down here. Why are they not filling this position? We have a very clear grizzly bear recovery plan from 2020. It was originally made in 2010, updated in 2020. And it's got very clear steps that not only should there be a Jay Honeyman, but there should be 7 of them, one for each bear management area in the province. And they haven't filled any of those positions. They actually haven't really got anybody in a conflict specific position. And it's interesting, if you look at our neighbor, Montana, Montana has twice the number of bears in a smaller area, and they have 20 people working specifically on reducing grizzly bear human conflict. So as a result of that, they have 1/4 of the attacks and less than half of the conflict incidents that Alberta has currently. So although I did want to point out, that press release that came out from the government, it talks about 8 maulings or 8 fatalities and 64 maulings and all this stuff. That's from 2005. That's a 20-year period. By comparison, if you compare the number of grizzlies that have killed people in Canada, you can actually compare it directly to something like the number of people that have died from lightning strikes. That's how rare it is, especially when you consider we've got 5 million people a year going into Banff National Park. And yet in Banff, there have only been 3 people killed by grizzly bears dating all the way back to 1986. So that's a pretty astonishing statistic. There's tons of people out there recreating. I do understand that the bears are recovering in this province right now. We do have more bears moving into more areas where they used to be. And so people that aren't used to seeing bears are suddenly seeing them. And that's why you see things like in that press release or where Lowen was on, Minister Lowen was on City News last night saying that people are scared to let their kids walk 200 meters to the road because they're afraid of grizzly bears. That's just a fear-based response. I mean, that's no different than saying you're afraid of letting your kid walk 200 meters to the road because there are child predators around. Of course, it's a legitimate reason to be scared, but there are mitigation measures you can take. Nobody would go and let their 5-year-old go and stand out at the road by themselves and wait for a bus. I mean, I've literally, living here in Canmore, had grizzly bears with cubs in my driveway before. So, you just take mitigation measures. You're always there with your child. You carry bear spray when you're recreating or moving around in bear country. You make noise. If you've got a 13-year-old that's walking out to a bus stop, you just tell them, hey, when you walk out there, yell out, hey, bear. Bears don't want to encounter us. They're going to move away. So there's some really easy mitigation measures that can be taken. And I think that this fear-based response that this press release has come out is really just going backwards. It's like we've stepped back into the early 1900s or something, and suddenly everybody's supposed to be arming themselves with guns, and we're going out there and we're killing all these problem bears that are, trying to kill us all. And it's just some ridiculous rhetoric that I just simply don't agree with. And I think the majority of Albertans can really see through this and see that all that Minister Lowen is really doing is he's providing opportunities for his cronies to get out there and kill some grizzly bears, which they've been wanting to do for decades now.
Is that what you think this is? You think, I mean, we'll note that the minister is a partner in, like, has an ownership interest or benefits in some way from an outfitting company. This has been the story. It's not new, and he's been upfront about it. He's talked about it. He's commented on it in past. People can Google Minister Todd Lowen, and the ethics commissioner is taking a look at it. And his assertion is that just because he owns a guiding or hunting or outfitting company doesn't mean he can't serve in this role as the minister of this portfolio. He says you'd want a farmer or someone with farming experience as the minister of agriculture as well. You'd probably want somebody that knows their way around numbers to be the minister of finance. But do you think that this is what that boils down to? That this is your opinion? That the government's sticking its neck out there on what appears to be a pretty unpopular change to the Wildlife Act, just so a few people can go out and hunt grizzly bears for sport?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back even 3-4 years ago, there were a lot of hints from Minister Nixon when he was environment minister and grizzly bears fell under him. He made a number of comments, and he was also tied to guide outfitting and was a really big hunter, big game hunter, just like Minister Lowen is. And those hints have kind of carried on, and we now see it. It was really clear in this that they overrode government biologists. If you look at the Calgary Herald article that Bill Kaufman wrote in October 2023, provincial carnivore biologist Paul Frame was quoted as saying that the grizzly bear population in the province is nowhere near losing that threatened status yet, and that there's no talk whatsoever of there being a grizzly bear hunt. And yet here we are 10 months later, and did magically during hibernation over the winter another 500 grizzlies show up. And what is this strange rhetoric around, oh, it's just going to be problem bears? And then Minister Lowen actually said that there's about 20 bears a year euthanized in the province, and that's simply not true. If you look at the data from the grizzly bear status report, population status report done by Marco Fiesta Bianchette in 2022, so just 1.5 years ago, his data suggests that we're only having about 3 bears a year euthanized as problem bears. The rest are being poached or hit by vehicles or trains. They're still human-caused mortality, but they're not bears that a hunter can go out and shoot. So I don't even know where he's going to come up with this. This is where this real concern lies, is that he's got some very vague language in these amendments to the Wildlife Act. And I want to point out that what he's done is not illegal, but it's obvious that he's overridden what his own biologists and what the rest of the province's biologists and grizzly bear biologists, like Dr. Sarah Elmeligi, who I think you're going to have on next, like what they feel and think. And so if you're overriding that research and you're just making a decision, really you've got to come back to think, well, why is he making this decision? What are his ties? And you look in a little closer and hey, there's that owner shareholder in Red Willow Outfitting out of Red Deer. They offer guided hunts for wolves and black bears and moose and all kinds of things. So it's not hard to draw that connection and go, well, geez, if they're going to have these wildlife management responders, this ridiculous term that is really basically hitmen, hunters that are going to be hired by the government, untrained people that are going to go out and respond. They're going to be wildlife vigilantes. It's going to be no different than if the police came to us and said, hey, you know what? We've got all this crime happening in this area, but we don't have enough people to deal with it. So you know what? We're going to hire this vigilante crew people, and we're just going to say to you guys, hey, here's the description. Here's the area. Why don't you go out and, it's this brown bear. It's kind of big. We think it killed a cow or two. Here's where it is. Can you go shoot it for us, please? I mean, how ridiculous would that be if we had vigilante crews like this going out and managing crime in our cities? Again, we're not dealing with something in the 1880s. This is
well, and John, like
2024.
just to maybe state the obvious as well from the other relationship is that if somebody's looking to bag a grizzly bear, I wonder how tough it is to file a couple reports that there's a problem bear in the area that all of a sudden needs a tag issued for,
Absolutely. This opens the door to, unscrupulous people going out into an area, camping off the grid, leaving a bit of food out and going, oh, geez, we have a grizzly bear coming into this area. Can we get an opportunity to kill this bear? Same thing with a rancher that really doesn't like grizzly bears. What's to stop them now from dragging a carcass out, sitting it out in the forest? Fish and wildlife officers are already completely overwhelmed as it is. There just aren't enough of them, enough conservation officers in the province. When I spoke with Jay Honeyman, again, he's the human wildlife conflict specialist that retired in 2022. He was saying like the amount of training he went through and the amount of training that these fish and wildlife officers go through, there's simply no way that these wildlife management responders, these hitmen, are going to be able to go through any amount of the same training, and they're going to misidentify bears. They're going to kill the wrong things. What is this talk about them going out and tracking problem bears? Like, that's just total nonsense. And again, I think the majority of Albertans are going to read this. They're going to hear people like me, and they're going to put two and two together and go, yeah, this is just, what the heck are these guys talking about? They're just making stuff up. And it's really going to paint this UCP government in a poor picture when it comes to wildlife management. And I want to point out, too, this is not the first time that Minister Lowen has done something like this. All we have to do is go back to April for the last instance, where right at the end of the cougar hunting season, he magically went in and increased the female cougar hunting quota by 125% at the end of the season so that his guide outfitter friends could go out and harvest more female cougars, which the provincial carnivore biologist, again, has been very public about saying we're trying to reduce female cougar harvest. So this is where, again, he just completely overrode a biologist, his own biologist, and went out and did this. And he caught his own departments completely off guard. Speaking with people like Matt Besco, and they really didn't know that some of this stuff was coming down, or when they did, it was just ordered upon them. And of course, these biologists are not telling me this. They can't even tell me this stuff. They're muzzled. I call them up and I try to chat to them, and they go, John, I can't talk to you about this. I'm sorry. And that's ridiculous. For me, being a person that's very involved in wildlife management, I have a Bachelor of Science degree in wildlife management. I've had relationships with many of these biologists provincially for quite a long time, and I can't even phone them up and talk to them about this stuff. So it really tells you, there's something going on behind the scenes here. And now we're supposed to trust Minister Lowen and the Fish and Wildlife officers to go out and identify these problem bears when they just went and tried to sneak this in. I mean, June 18th is when it went through, and then it was published in the Alberta Gazette in 2000, or June 29th. So on a Saturday, nobody noticed it because it was on page 316 of the Gazette until July 5th. And thank goodness both CPAWS and the Alberta Wilderness Association had people that were combing through the Gazette and noticed this. And so it's been less than a week since it's gone public. And then, of course, magically yesterday, a press release comes out from the government. And it's just all over the place. I mean, it's talking about elk and black bear attacks. And, it's like somebody just wrote it up last night and quickly released it. And it's talking about problem bears and all this fear, and we got to stop them from predating on people. And, just a bunch of nonsense that really is completely out there. And I really do hope Albertans get on Minister Lowen, get on Danielle Smith and say, what is this guy doing in charge of our wildlife? Like this, not only do we need to strike these amendments from the Wildlife Act, this clause that he has put in, but we need to have Minister Lowen removed at this point. I mean, he's obviously shown that he's got an agenda for stuff like this. We're dealing with a threatened species. We're trying to recover it. The last thing you need to be doing when you're recovering a threatened species is be out there killing them. Instead, we should be employing every tactic that we can to avoid killing them. Get all those Jay Honeymans back into positions. Get a mobile response team out there that responds specifically to conflicts and deals with bears, relocates them. That doesn't mean that there aren't still instances where a bear might get euthanized. That's necessary in some cases. We saw that in Banff National Park last year with that one predatory attack that happened in Alberta last year. And that was just a crazy rare incident. It's like having a vending machine fall on you. And if you Google it, vending machines falling on people actually kills as many people in North America per year as grizzly bear attacks do. That's just how rare and how ridiculous of a stat we're talking about here.
If you're just tuning in, live streaming the audio on the Mixler app presented by California Closets, we're talking to renowned conservation photographer John E. Marriott, coming up, MLA Sarah Elmeligi out of MLA. She's the MLA out of Banff-Kananaskis. She's also a PhD, a bear biologist. And the two of you collaborated on a book, correct, John? You collaborated on What Bears Teach Us. Is that right?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about What Bears Teach Us was we were trying to take a bit of a different angle, and Sarah did a wonderful job of looking at some of the emotions, some of the things that bears have taught us, and I'll let her speak to that more, but it allowed me to showcase a number of photographs that don't normally make it into a book. So a lot of the interesting stuff, if you go up to the Yukon, and some of the pictures in the book include the Yukon has campgrounds that are fully surrounded by electric fences. Lake Louise has the same thing. There's a lot of different measures that have been taken in different areas that I see Alberta lagging in certain jurisdictions. And this is, again, where all these bear management areas that go all the way from northern Alberta through the Swan Hills, through Grand Prairie, and south all the way down to the Castle and Waterton, where there's so much more we can be enabling. And through the Exposed Wildlife Conservancy, which I co-founded with Kim Odland out of Edmonton, we actually hired Dr. Sarah Elmeligi to write us a report on next steps that should be implemented for the grizzly bear recovery plan. And this was before she got elected as an MLA. So while she was still an independent grizzly bear biologist in the province, and she really outlined some key steps that I think she will probably speak to next on ways that we can reduce conflict without killing bears. This is really what it comes down to, is why on earth are we killing them in the first place? And if we are going to kill them, let's let the professionals that are trained to do this get in and do it. There's absolutely no way we should be letting untrained trophy hunters, because that's really what it is. I mean, what are these hunters going to be going in? Minister Lowen was very clear in a couple media interviews yesterday that this is not a hunting opportunity. And he's absolutely right. It's a killing opportunity. so his buddies can go out and kill grizzly bears. So let's be very clear on that.
John, changes to this Wildlife Act, they state, as we've talked about, problem bears, bears that are involved in a conflict or an area of concern that can be hunted. It says that bears with cubs cannot be hunted, but the changes include defining a human-bear conflict as an incident where a grizzly is habituated or food conditioned and, quote, poses an imminent public safety risk if it's killed livestock, damaged private property, which that sounds to me to be subjective, or made contact with a human resulting in injury or death. And then livestock includes horses, sheep, cattle, pigs, goats, poultry, chickens, right? Alpacas, llamas, bees, which is kind of interesting. Deer, bison raised in captivity. What do you think? And I mean, your friends and your colleagues that are in the wildlife management, the biologists that you're talking to, what is, consensus? Obviously, killing, like euthanizing these bears, the last resort, obviously. What are some of the ideal management techniques? What sort of legislation would you like to see? What approach would you like to see from this ministry and from this government? What do you think is the right way to do it?
Well, I think first and foremost, get a bear-human conflict specialist into each of the bear management areas. Get a mobile response team, as I mentioned earlier, that can respond to conflicts very quickly throughout the province, and is highly trained in bear safety, bear conflict, reducing conflict risk. And there are people like this already out there. And we've also got Montana to be able to lean on because they've got this staff of 20 people that's exactly what they do all the time for the 9 months of the year when grizzly bears are out of hibernation. And then, Sarah will speak to this a bit more, but there are a lot of different mitigation measures that can be taken. And if we look at a community like Canmore that I live in, we had a fatal mauling in the year 2000, I believe it was, a very tragic incident. And yet the community has managed to still coexist with grizzly bears. Now, we've got a different issue with choking off their corridors with our development. But in terms of people recreating and being outside, it hasn't stopped anybody from being out, knowing that there's a risk on the land, but taking measures to protect yourself against that. If I go out for a mountain bike ride later today, I've got bear spray on me. I'm making yells as I'm going out on the trails. And I've never encountered a grizzly bear riding around because I'm very careful to make sure that I don't. That said, even if you do, there are a lot of different measures to ensure that you don't. But, Canmore has gone about, we've got a program in place now to remove fruit trees, for instance, out of people's yards. I just took advantage of that program earlier this spring and had 2 apple trees removed from my front yard that the town of Canmore paid for. So these types of programs and funding towards this, helping out ranchers, helping out rural people that live rurally, that may have pets that are roaming about, may have livestock, have children that are walking about, just different ways that you can protect them and make sure that you're mitigating the risk and reducing that risk. And so that you can still live and coexist and be out there in what essentially is the grizzly bear's home. We've moved into their home. We're very lucky in the province that the bears are recovering right now. Maybe eventually we'll be able to get rid of that threatened status. But even at that point, it still doesn't mean that we need to hunt these bears. There's very clear biology showing that grizzly bears manage their own populations. We may decide at some point there's certain areas in the province that we don't want grizzly bears to be in. And maybe at that point we decide, okay, if we don't want them right beside the city of Calgary, we can figure out something to do to look at that. Maybe it is a hunt, but there's lots of other measures we can take long before that. And really, we have to get back to focusing on recovering a threatened species. The last thing we need to be doing right now is getting people out there and shooting these problem bears, of which there are very few.
Interesting you invoke the name of the boss. I mean, it feels like anytime you're going to talk about grizzly bears in Western Canada, so you're going to talk about the boss. A remarkable, a magnificent animal, but there's been a lot of issues. Number one, and I want to talk to you just about like highway management and traffic management. I want to talk to you about train transportation in Canada. I think it's widely known for anybody and I go into deep rabbit holes reading about grizzlies and trains. And if you're at our home, we have art of grizzlies everywhere. And John, I'm obsessed with these bears. Seeing one in person is a spiritual experience. Unless it's a little too close. People can relate to that too, some of them I'm sure. But the boss has been hit at least one time by a train, we know, and survived. I know it's difficult for some people to see video and photographs of not just that bear, but many of them along the train tracks through the national parks. There's grain spillage on those tracks. The bears have figured it out. It's a somewhat reliable source of food. Of course, we see some traffic accidents, and they have happened, some of them involving law enforcement and sheriffs, because people are obviously rubbernecking and seeing something that granted they've never seen before. Some people have traveled halfway around the world to see these animals, and there it is. But there's cars all over the place and people getting their own long lenses out. And you get the point I'm getting at. And then there was this gut-wrenching story just a short time ago. The beautiful bear, Nakota. I think most people that have been paying attention to the news know exactly who this sow is. Nakota, unfortunately, lost 2 of her cubs in a highway accident. They were struck by a vehicle. And then I think, what was it, John? A week or 2 later, she herself was struck and killed. A beautiful light-colored grizzly known as Nakota. So, I mean, it's just reiterating that we do have an issue here with wildlife management. I'm not talking about, these aren't the problem bears I'm talking about, I guess, depending on the definition. But just your comment on that and what you see the future looking like. I've seen some people say we need better highway traffic controls, we need better communication, we need more speed traps. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you circled over to this because there is a direct tie to bears like Nakota and what's going on with Alberta's grizzly. So, Nakota lived right in the core of our UNESCO Rocky Mountain World Heritage Site on the border of Banff National Park and Yoho National Park. And she was killed on the roadway she was hit a day after her cubs, or later that same day. And then died a day later. So we lost her 2 cubs. We lost her the year before, 2 years before, we lost her sibling, her twin sister, on the Trans-Canada Highway in the exact same spot. And the year before that, we lost her mother on the Trans-Canada Highway. And a total of 6 breeding females have been lost from that core population in Banff National Park since 2019. With human-caused mortality. And then there was another one that was killed by a mountain goat. If you suddenly look at that and you go, wait a second, this is a protected area and bears are struggling there. What's to mean that this can't instantly turn in some of these other areas where bears are recovering? We've got bears that have done a wonderful job of recovering in the Grand Prairie, Grand Cache areas, in southern Alberta, in the Castle and Waterton areas. But these bears are all hanging by a thread. We've got industry development all over the place. We've got people living and recreating all over the place. Very, very easy to see this turning a corner in a very negative way. And I wanted to point out too that, if people want to go and see beautiful snow-capped mountains, they can go to the Alps, they can go to Japan. There's all sorts of different places they can go see that. But the reason people come to the Canadian Rockies and support our multi-billion-dollar industry, our tourism industry in Alberta, is because we have these charismatic predators and megafauna like grizzly bears. This is an iconic species that people from around the world revere. And when you think like that, it seems absolutely ridiculous that we're offering any kind of opportunity for people to come and kill these bears. And this tactic of killing problem wildlife has actually been used in Africa before to reintroduce trophy hunting in areas where it had been stopped. And it has always been a stepping stone. It's actually a Safari Club International tactic. That's the biggest US-based trophy hunting organization. And it's a tactic they've used in the past to get back into areas and eventually step forward where they get back into full-on guided trophy hunting again. And we can certainly see that could happen here in Alberta, given Lowen's past and given Jason Nixon's past and their ties to this UCP government. When you put all this together, then you go, geez, we've had bears like Nakota die. We really do need to look at mitigation measures everywhere. So we need to have speed reduction zones on some of our Trans-Canada Highway wildlife zones, on Highway 93 North, Highway 93 South. Does everybody really have to get from A to B at 120 kilometers an hour? Can we slow traffic down for 10 minutes to 70 kilometers an hour in some of these wildlife zones? Can we make some permanent no stopping zones where people get to see these bears, or maybe there's pullouts where people can pull out and stop, like Yellowstone, and it's a safe place to pull off. And if there's a bear near there, you can watch it. There's a number of different things that can be done. Can we slow trains down a little bit? We know that, we've had, I think it's 19 grizzlies since the year 2000. So basically one a year killed on our railroad just in Banff National Park alone. So there's all sorts of different things we can look at when we want to talk about recovering grizzly bears in this province. And that's really the key, is we're still recovering a threatened species.
John, I knew that this was going to be a fantastic conversation. Obviously, the subject matter sucks, but what shines through loud and clear is the passion that you have for protecting this species and for wildlife in general. I don't often gush over the guests, but I do want to just let people know that I've followed and admired your work for a long time. I want to encourage people to follow you on Instagram, where about 100,000 people do, at John E. Marriott. That's where you'll see the Canon ambassador, the wildlife conservation photographer at work, just some of his remarkable work there. And then, of course, What Bears Teach Us, the book that he shot the photographs for alongside our next guest who provided the text. And we'll be checking in with Dr. Elmeligi in just a moment. Thanks for your time, John. We sincerely appreciate the advocacy.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
Yeah, you got it. Coming up in just a moment, Dr. Sarah Elmeligi, who's the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis, also a bear biologist, obviously. The timing on this quick little break seems to kind of fit, doesn't it, John? I mean, when I think of Jasper National Park, when I think of memories made in Jasper National Park, I can't help but think, and I've told the story on the show before, I won't go into it too at length, but a hike with my pals 12, 13 years ago around Mount Robson. It's called the Moose River Route. You hike up to Berg Lake, which is a spectacular spot to stay overnight. It is named that. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's still got big, huge glacier chunks of ice floating around in that lake, a magnificent vista. And then you head into the deep backcountry, and that's where on day 3 of our hike we saw this sow grizzly with 2 cubs from a distance, and we're able to observe them for, I don't know, I'd say 15-20 minutes, something like that, as they slowly made their way up above the tree line. And we'll never forget the way that the light hit her fur and just her muscles. You could just see her muscles as she deftly made her way across that, what would be described as like a scramble, just that kind of rough rock, and these 2 cubs figuring everything out about life in the Rockies with Mama Bear. It was a really special experience. And, every Wednesday, our friends at Tourism Jasper give us a chance to focus on memories that are made out there in Jasper National Park. I'm sure that you have your very own. And at this time of year, as we're talking to you, as summer temperatures are in some cases breaking records, I mean, just absolutely beautiful days. It's a great way, or a great reason anyway, to head out to Jasper and find ways to beat the heat. Number one, of course, the Athabasca River. It creates the backdrop for just absolute beauty and magnificent experiences there in Jasper National Park. Rafting has got to be the number one way to beat the heat, hitting Jasper's historic rivers with a whitewater outfitter on a float tour. There's everything from the easy breezy kind of family-friendly trips. The guide will do all the paddling, or if you want to rip through Class 3 rapids and burn a few calories on your own, there's that option as well. You can also check out some of the lakes out there. Lake Annette, Lake Edith, which our family absolutely adores, and Jasper Lake are all wonderful places to lay out a towel, crack open a picnic basket, and lounge waterside with some of the most stunning scenery on planet Earth. And then don't forget the Maligne Lake Cruise. I know a lot of people know about this, so I don't know if I can call it underrated, but I'm just going to say it had been a few years that we'd been going out to Jasper until we did that cruise, and it blew my mind. You can see magical Spirit Island with Pursuit's fascinating boat tour. That's the tour that we went on. Their guides are amazing. They'll talk to you about the indigenous history in the area. They'll talk to you about the last 100 years or so and the significance of all of that. It'll take you to that world-famous spot, that Spirit Island, which has great spiritual, cultural, historic significance as well. You can get more fun weekend ideas and start planning your own Jasper memories by checking out jasper.travel online. Jasper, of course, one of our favorite places. If that's not obvious, every single time we talk about it, that's every Wednesday, presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. It's MyJasper Memories, right here on Real Talk. Dr. Sarah Elmeligi is the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis, the opposition critic for environment and tourism. But as you just heard from photographer Johnny Marriott, before Sarah's foray into politics, she was working as a bear biologist and a landscape ecologist in Alberta. She's been doing that for like 15 years. She earned her master's and her PhD, conducting research applying biological and social science techniques to understand the impacts of recreation on the grizzly bear population, in particular, grizzly behavior and habitat use. She's the author of What Bears Teach Us, which of course integrates John's incredible photos as well. It's an investigation into the science and management of bears with personal stories to advance human-bear coexistence in communities and in protected areas. Dr. Elmeligi, welcome to Real Talk, and thank you for making time for us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. And that was a great conversation you just had with John. I was listening on YouTube, and John's so great.
Well, he obviously, like I said, cares a great deal about the animals that we're talking about, and so do you. I owe you an apology. You and I have sat on a couple stages together. We've participated in some political forums, and I knew that you care very deeply about politics. I had no idea last time we spoke about your career as a bear biologist. I mean, this is your wheelhouse.
Yep, it sits right in it, actually. And as a biologist and as a conservationist, landscape planner, I've been directly involved in the grizzly bear recovery plan. I was involved in getting grizzly bears listed as threatened in 2010. I've been directly involved in all kinds of land use planning, looking at grizzly bear and human coexistence on public lands, on parkland. And I've worked really closely with a lot of really incredibly amazing Albertans who all have the objective of recovering Alberta's grizzly bear population. We are so lucky in Alberta to honestly have some of the smartest, most internationally renowned bear biologists at our disposal. And one of the things that kind of upsets me about these regulations is that we're not using that incredible resource of experience and intelligence when we're talking about creating policy or regulations around grizzly bear management.
So what has your research in past, I mean, you wrote an entire book literally on human bear coexistence. So when we're talking about so-called problem bears in the context of interactions with human beings, help us understand the root cause. I mean, I know a lot of people, it's like, it's as simple as like, not properly storing your food when you're out in the backcountry. They're, bears that start to rely on whether it's, grain spill on train tracks or garbage in communities, whatever it is, they become food habituated. But how did we get to the point where Alberta's grizzly population in the early 2000s was, if I remember correctly, right around the 700 mark, which was sounding a lot of alarms?
Yeah, well, it's hard to coexist with a large carnivore like grizzly bears. It does come with challenges, and sometimes it doesn't always work well, right? And of course, it's always really, really tragic anytime somebody is hurt or killed by a bear, whether that's a grizzly bear or a black bear. But our relationship with bears goes way, way back, like to the 1800s, or even further. Indigenous people have relationships with bears on this landscape since time immemorial, right? And for us, a lot of that relationship can be based on fear. And so when we talk about coexistence with bears or our relationship with bears, and this is why I wrote the book, there's always the bear's perspective, but the human perspective is equally as important, because if we're reacting from a place of fear, we may be more quickly to land on aggressive management options. But if we can take a step back and react from a place of trying to understand the bear's behavior, we might see that other management options could also be effective. So I think grizzly bears have a really hard time making a go of it on the Alberta landscape. There's a lot of reasons for human-caused mortality, whether you're talking about highway mortality or train mortality. We also do a lot of things on the landscape. We alter grizzly bear habitat in a lot of ways, and that can also lead to mortality of grizzly bears. So poaching deeper and deeper into the backcountry, for example. And then, of course, there are the odd occasion where a grizzly bear has engaged in really damaging conflict behavior. So that could be, harming a person or, killing a bunch of livestock, like we saw with sheep earlier this year. And in those rare instances, Fish and Wildlife officers do euthanize individual bears. But as John said, that's really on average 2 to 3 bears a year. So it's not creating this like crazy onerous capacity issue for Fish and Wildlife staff that they need the public's help to start managing and euthanizing bears on the landscape. If we use the science of bear behavior and the social science of human expectation for managing bears, we would be doing things a lot differently, I think.
When we is there an issue, like if you hear from, I mean, you're talking about like the human interactions, we talk about livestock interactions. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers provided by the province. They say since 2016, 897 incidents where livestock were harmed or killed. So if I'm a rancher in the area, or if I'm somebody that is like has personal experience here, I remember talking to farmers in past, completely different animals, completely different predators. I don't want the audience to read too much into this, but people were talking about coyote management, and I remember one a cattle farmer telling me that the coyotes were getting so brazen that they were starting to attack calves before they were even fully born. They were like half out of the mama, and the coyotes were starting to swarm. I mean, this guy was trying to paint a picture of how serious it is. So for people where the bear interaction is maybe not a daily thing, but it's like a regular thing, and it's a very real thing, and it's hurting their investment, and it's making them feel unsafe. Like, is this a moment where Albertans maybe need to start having a bigger conversation about the reality of that? And are we at a point where something does need to be done? I mean, this issue hasn't just like come up out of nowhere for a couple of the minister's hunting buddies, right? Like, it's got to be more than that.
Sure. And yes, something does need to be done. One of the reasons why grizzly bears are listed as threatened is because of human-bear conflict. And, you kind of asked before, I didn't answer it, sorry, but like what led us to where we are today, or what led grizzly bears to being listed as threatened? A big part of it was just people killing bears out of fear for safety of their livestock or their families, or, managing bears themselves on their land, right? And so really what we've tried to focus on for the last 20 years as a field of study and as a field of management is, how do we help people coexist with grizzly bears? What does that actually mean? And a big focus of that effort has been with private landowners. There's been some great successes in southern Alberta, like in the Pincher Creek area, Waterton area, the Eastern Slopes, working with ranchers and agriculturalists to address some of that livestock mortality and conflict risk. So there's two pieces there. The one is the preventative risk reduction piece, and that can come from like electric fencing, chicken coops, or silage pits, or things that are kind of smaller in area that might attract bears to the property. So that's one thing, is like reducing the attractants. For me, the number one thing that I always come back to when it comes to grizzly bear management is that it is about food, 100%. They are food driven like 98% of the time, and the other 2% of the time they're just trying to protect their cubs, or they're trying to find mates for 3 weeks in June. But the rest of the time, it is about food. So if we can secure attractants on private land with electric fencing, then we can reduce the risk that that bear will want to, wreak havoc on that particular piece of private land. The other component of this in Alberta is the livestock compensation program. And we have livestock compensation, randomly in that news release yesterday, the minister brought up the elk crop damage and just kind of threw that in, which is weird. Obviously not the same issue, but same outcome. We have a livestock compensation program for crop damage or livestock damage due to wildlife. That program is relatively user-friendly, but it could definitely stand with some improvements. It could also stand with some increased funding availability, right? So it's not asking people to choose either or, like either we have grizzly bears on the landscape or we have sheep and cows. Obviously, the role that ranchers play in our society is irreplaceable, right? Like they're incredibly important people. They provide our food and delicious food at that. So, I think we can be very grateful about that, but also work with ranchers and agriculturalists to implement measures on their land that reduce the conflict risk and then support them if that conflict does indeed happen.
I want to let people know, most people are going to hear this on the podcast, but if you're watching this episode on YouTube, and you really should, we've been privy to the amazing photography by John E. Marriott, and we're also showing clips from, he's one of the co-founders of Exposed Wildlife Conservancy. The film, if you want to check it out, it's like a short film. It's a feature on YouTube. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's called In the Crosshairs, The Road to Recovery for Alberta's Threatened Grizzly Bears. And it's about a half an hour. Obviously, Dr. Elmeligi, you're all over the video there, and people will learn a great deal by watching that full 30 minutes. Let's talk about the politics of all of this. There's a theme here when I see the protests. Number one, the outcry from biologists, people that understand wildlife, that are looking at the trends, and then from others just on the political side of it, zero consultation, quietly implemented, devoid of announcement. You're the opposition critic right around here. I mean, this is your target, I suppose. What correspondence have you had with the government? What correspondence have you had with the minister? What's been the scuttlebutt? What can you tell us from behind the scenes?
Well, I will say that these changes to the Wildlife Act regulations, I learned about them in the Alberta Gazette, which is like this publication that comes out regularly for MLAs and government bureaucrats. It is just like the list of all of the government regulations that have been updated or amended in the last few weeks. These changes to the Wildlife Act were buried in there. There was no public announcement. This came out on the Saturday before the Saturday of the Canada Day long weekend. So, people aren't even hearing about it. And I didn't even hear about it until one of my colleagues was like, hey, have you seen this? So, that sneakiness, I really don't like that. The minister knows full well that this is going to be an issue that Albertans are going to care about and have opinions about. And for something like this to be released without really sharing it publicly until it ends up in the media, I think really speaks to the lack of transparency and trust that Albertans can have in this government. It's a recurring theme across ministries. I'm also really shocked and dismayed that some of the grizzly bear biologist experts in this province were not actually consulted. And I know this because my first reaction was to call them, because they're still colleagues of mine, even though I'm in politics now. My first reaction was to call them and be like, whoa, what is this? Like, we had all heard rumors that there might be something, but I had no idea that this was coming, and neither did they. The minister has said that he's talked to people in rural meetings and gatherings. That's just the job of every single MLA. We all travel the province. We go to different community gatherings and we talk to people about issues that are concerning them. That's great. That is not consultation. And it definitely isn't consultation with experts. There's a whole team of experts who wrote and updated the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan. None of them were consulted in this decision. The Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan has a whole suite of recommendations in it around managing human-bear conflict and moving towards coexistence. And none of those recommendations are to increase opportunities for the public to kill bears. So I'm not entirely sure where these regulation changes come from, but they have not been recommended by any of the experts that I know, and they're not in any of the government documents that are supposed to be guiding grizzly bear management in the province. I think one of the saddest things in Alberta is that we've politicized grizzly bear recovery. This shouldn't be about politics. It should actually just be about science and effective wildlife management, and it's not.
Yeah. Although, I mean, I'll take your point. I also don't know if it's politicized in the sense that I haven't seen in the first 2-3 days that people have been talking about this since it's kind of really hit the news cycle. And here we go, shining the spotlight on it. But I've not really seen like a ton of people stepping forward and supporting it, right? I mean, as a matter of fact, I tried like hell. Yes, I don't usually say stuff like this, but like we tried like hell yesterday to get somebody to come on the show today and advocate for the changes, right?
Right.
I won't say who, and we were in correspondence with several of them, and a lot of people are just like either it's not worth it right now, or we don't know enough about it, but there's not a lot of people that are like stepping forward and saying this is a great idea. And I'm talking to people in my own friend circle, in my own orbit, that vote different ways. That most of them seem to feel the same about this.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is hard to find somebody who's in support of it. I was also wondering that too, because I like to try to, consider the perspective of thoughts and
For
data that
sure.
feeds into this. I started actually thinking about hunting or, killing bears as a conflict management tool a few years ago, because I kind of feel like we knew that something like this was going to be happening. It was just a matter of time. And so when I was going to like international bear conferences and stuff, I was purposely connecting with researchers who were doing this kind of work to try to understand, what does the data say? And there have been a few studies that use hunting as a conflict management tool and then have been collecting data to, monitor the effectiveness of that approach. And what they have found is that hunting does not reduce conflict risk. It doesn't. Hunting just reduces the bear population. So in places where you have a really, really high density population, and this work has mostly been done with black bears in the east, where they have really high density populations on agricultural lands or around communities. Hunting can be an effective tool because it just reduces the population to a point where there's less bears. So there's less bears to engage in conflict. We don't actually have that problem here in Alberta. We have a threatened grizzly bear population. The whole point of the recovery plan is to increase that population. So us going around killing bears in the name of conflict management, not only does it not align with the recovery plan, but it's not going to work. It does not address the source of the problem. That's why. And there's also no guarantee that you are removing the offender, the conflict bear, or the problem bear, which is even language that in wildlife biology we avoid now, because they're not problem bears, they're just bears being bears. What we need to manage is, frankly, us as people, how we manage our attractants, how we prepare to share the landscape with bears. I heard John talking a lot about, bear spray and preparedness as recreationists. All that's really important also. It's a lot easier to manage people, frankly, than it is to manage bears, I think. So if we have better livestock compensation programs, better subsidies for electric fencing, if we actually had the staff in bear management areas as recommended in the Grizzly Bear Recovery Plan to coordinate human bear coexistence at the provincial level, and to actually be working with individual landowners to address their attractant issues, we would have a lot more success in reducing conflict than just running around killing bears, because that doesn't actually work. It's not going to solve the problem. So it's a waste of time and money.
Before we thank you for your time, is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet that you think is relevant to this conversation at this point, something that you want to make sure the audience hears?
Well, I think the big thing is for people to know and appreciate that the minister is making this decision counter to science, counter to expert opinion, counter to its own grizzly bear recovery plan. And all of those things are very problematic. And if people care about that kind of transparency and accountability and science-based decision-making in wildlife management, they should write the minister a letter and express those concerns. And they should CC me as the critic for environment. I'm happy to talk about bears all day long, obviously. And anybody can contact me anytime about this. But I think really the minister needs to hear from Albertans about this issue and their feelings about it.
I love telling and hearing bear stories as well. We have another one right around Marvel Lake off Mount Assiniboine that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and just incredible animals. In closing, we should have opened with this. Do you have a favorite bear story based on your personal experience?
Oh, there are so many. I mean, I all of my master's and PhD research was hanging out in the woods watching bears. I think my favorite thing about bears is that there's not one particular story that I have, because bears are so individual and they have personalities. And watching them grow up and develop those personalities is such a gift in my life. But also watching their funny antics. Like, I went on this backpacking trip in the Tonquin one year in Jasper. And it's so funny because you just did the whole like Jasper is amazing piece, and Jasper is amazing. And we watched a grizzly bear taking a bath in a creek. It was a hot day in the backcountry. And suddenly these ground squirrels started like peeping around this batch of alders, like peep, peep. And this grizzly bear was like, I don't like you. You are annoying. I'm trying to have my quiet nap in the creek. And this grizzly bear started trying to catch these ground squirrels, and they kept evading him. And there was like alder branches flying and leaves flying everywhere. And every time the bear would go down into the alders, there'd be this little peep from the other side, like peep. And he'd like stand up and whirl around, like just like wrecking the alpine trying to catch this little tiny ground squirrel. I laughed so hard, like it was really hilarious. So, when we have the opportunity to safely view bears just being bears, they're far enough away and they're not concerned about you, it can be a really magical time. But we also need to remember that they are large carnivores and they can be dangerous. And so being prepared, knowing your own personal limits to recreate outside, and accepting the risk that you take, having your bear spray, being in large groups, dogs on leash, all of those standard things are really important. And then, of course, when you're on private land, it's a little different scenario. That's why we need to work with private landowners individually and find solutions that work.
Dr. Sarah Elmeligi is a bear biologist, the author of What Bears Teach Us, and the MLA for Banff-Kananaskis. It was good to see you, by the way, participating in the Canada Day Parade in Canmore. We were out there, a big family vacations. Yeah, that was the town of Canmore does it right, don't they? I was impressed. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
We do. Yeah, the Canmore Canada Day Parade is one of my favorite days to MLA.
So much fun. So much fun. Hey, thanks for the conversation. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, Ryan.
You as well. Now, Real Talkers, over to you. Talk at ryanjesperson.com is where you can find us. That's where our inbox is open 24 hours a day. I'm curious to pick your brain on this and how you feel about this. I mean, I do sincerely want to hear another perspective on this from somebody that feels like this is the right call, that feels like this is the right move. But everywhere I'm looking, I'm finding consensus. And I'm talking from like the scientists and the researchers and the biologists. They're saying this is not the right way to do it. This is not the right way to manage the population. This is not the right way to manage the issue of human bear or bear livestock interactions. Talk at ryanjesperson.com, our email. We'll get to the Real Talk live chat in just a quick second, but first I want to remind you this conversation happens with the support of Real Talk partners like our friends at California Closets. You can find them online at californiaclosets.ca. That's where you can request and schedule your free design consultation. It doesn't cost you a thing to sit down with their experts, their team of designers, and start dreaming about how your space could be custom designed to fit exactly what you need. They can work with your budget, they can work with your timeline, and everything that they install comes with a lifetime guarantee. Nobody in the business does it better than California Closets. It's barbecue season, and Friesen Brothers has you covered across the province of Alberta with 17 different locations. This place, every single one of them still family owned. On hot days like this, they want you to know that they've got free ice cream at the Friesen Brothers Fresh Market stores. Free ice cream for the little guys and just $3 for big kids. So if you're heading out with the family to pick up maybe some barbecue stuff for the evening, why not mixing a little ice cream into the afternoon? They've got Alberta's finest meats from their real butchers. They've got, of course, artisan breads and pastries from their remarkable bakery. And don't forget, of course, the locally sourced produce that they're known for. All of it part of what makes Friesen Brothers special. Our friends at Kubi Renewable Energy know that they've got satisfied customers this time of year is you're getting, 18, 19 hours of sunlight, maybe more than that. This time of year is when solar's really paying off for folks that have gone to Kubi for their install to decrease their carbon footprint and to go green. Kubi's team installing across Western Canada is doing it in agricultural, commercial, industrial, and residential applications, and they're hiring right now. You can check out the details on their website. I'm showing you kubienergy.ca. That's where you can find the careers link as well. They're always looking for installers, for sales personnel, you name it. 4 different locations: Calgary, Edmonton, Lethbridge, and Kamloops, BC. And our friends at Complete Care Restoration want you to know that if, heaven forbid, disaster strikes, you've got to deal with fire or even smoke damage. Maybe it's flooding, a sewer backup. Maybe your small renovation turned into a big problem with asbestos or black mold. They've got more than a quarter century of experience with certified experts ready to respond 24/7. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. Our thanks to Dr. Sarah Elmeligi and John E. Marriott, the photographer, as well. And we'll catch up with Kevin Van Tighem down the road, former superintendent of Banff National Park. But do you have any, was there any moment in today's show that changed your mind on anything? Did you have, Johnny, a position established already? And did you receive some new insight into anything that maybe changed your perspective or approach to the story?
No, I'm always on the I don't want to say animals, because humans are animals too, but I'm always on their side kind of thing. I think we infringe, we encroach, we take up too much of their area, and that's usually when things like this happen, when these stories that people use to give theories on why we should be able to hunt more and encroach on more spaces, and even stuff with coyotes. And I know coyotes are a big threat, to everything from our pets to ourselves to our crops.
We had one on our front lawn this morning.
Yeah, of course. But again, that's because we're in their house, man. This is all their place. Like, especially in Alberta, where you've got all these places where these incredible landscapes where we go. We're just talking about Jasper, where we go up and we're in their vicinity, right? So I think, your last guest was saying, most of the reasons that these incidents happen, where I know it's really tragic when people get attacked by wildlife and they suffer injuries and, God forbid, die, but it's usually about food, right? Yeah. It's usually because these animals are traveling closer and closer to us because we're encroaching on their areas, and they're just trying to survive and find sustenance. Right?
Yeah, 100%. I see Dennis in the chat says his uncle ranches in the Sparwood, BC area, a beautiful part of BC. In the interior, says he kept llamas. Yamas, as my buddy says, and kept Great Pyrenees dogs, and said he never had issues with bears or wolves. The Great Pyrenees, we've talked about that breed on the show before, just remarkable protectors and absolutely fearless. Yeah. I remember hearing somebody wrote into Real Talk when we talked about Great Pyrenees. This is like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I remember.
Somebody wrote in,
and
they were like, the Great Pyrenees kills coyotes for fun. Yeah. Like, that was it. But you're right about, and I saw when I touched on coyotes earlier, and I did want to acknowledge, I said I recognize these are different scenarios at a high level,
and they're scary too. If you see a coyote, like, they're lurking all the time.
Well, they can be. I mean, they can be skittish on humans. They can also be like, I would say the coyotes in our neighborhood, we're urban. We're like center core in Edmonton, and they look pretty well fed. And and I'm not making light of it. I'm not making fun of it. But you see like the missing posters of like the cats and the little dogs.
Oh,
everybody's going, we think we know what's going on. But I was not. I mean, that's not a fabrication. Like, literally, there was a coyote on our front lawn. Literally this morning when we went outside. So it is a thing. I saw Sharon but I just want to say when I saw when I brought up the coyotes earlier, and Sharon says you're talking about coyotes. Sharon says where she grew up, they had bear traps on the school ground. What?
And I've only been in Alberta since 2008, and we're not urban either, or we're urban too, but we're on the south side, which I mean, we're not out in the boonies or anything, but we get rabbits like crazy. We're closer to the airport, coyotes everywhere. And I'm thinking the same thing. Like, it's not like they're starving. They look, they're not lean. They're getting their sustenance. But I agree. When I see the coyotes, like, they're no joke. Like, I wouldn't want to go up and pet one of these things. But at the same time, like, every time I see them, I'm like, and the rabbits too, I'm like, man, this area must have just, before we inhabited it, it must have just been covered in wildlife. And now, the numbers are all
there's
off,
moose
right?
in our home city of Edmonton, where we're talking about. There's moose.
Yeah.
You'll find moose in the city.
Yeah.
Like that's not an unusual thing, because they've been here before and some of the habitat is fitting. Alberta Girl in the chat says coyotes are eating her calves. Says, but the 11 wolves in the area are doing the killing.
Ooh.
And Alberta Girl says Fish and Wildlife is ignoring the wolves. The wolf call deserves an entire different show. And I don't think that many people understand how wolf populations are managed in the province. And I'm not an authority and I'm not schooled up enough to talk about it, but we're talking about literally like shooting them from helicopters, blowing wolves away. And a lot of people that are proponents of that wildlife management technique will say, well, we're trying to preserve the caribou population.
Yeah.
That's why we're killing all these wolves. But I've seen outcry around that as well. I guess what I'll say is we'll put that on our long list, on our working list for future episodes, because I do think that wildlife like today we're talking about in this episode, we're talking about grizzly bears, right?
Yeah.
This is timely and topical. This is a change to the Wildlife Act specifically relating to grizzlies. But I think a bigger show, maybe a Real Talk Roundtable on wildlife management, period, would be fascinating. You talk about, human, and, the encroachment of sprawling cities and the way that we manage, our growth and what it means for animal populations. Or don't manage it. I do think that's worth the conversation.
We're always trying to call, and I'm not an expert and I'm not saying I have an answer. I think all of this is just kind of, it's unmanageable. You try to call one population of animal like wolves or coyotes or what are those birds here everyone hates, magpies or whatever, and then another population of animal thrives, and then you got to call them. It's just you're constantly managing it. It's kind of unmanageable, right?
Yeah. Travis says that he had a Great Pyrenees called Igloo when he was growing up. Says he protected our sheep. Yeah, I love hearing that. Horse Lake Ranch says grizzlies lived on the prairies way before they were forced to the mountains. Is that true? I know that grizzlies are on the prairies, but I didn't know they were forced into the mountains. Says, you guys going to give up your cities so they can come back home?
No,
from Horse Lake
not
Ranch.
what we're saying.
Well, maybe Horse Lake Ranch will let us come set up our trailers out on their property, and we can have a big, like a Real Talk commune out there. That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it?
I'll post up with binoculars and beers, but I'm not doing the hiking and getting up close to the animals.
Yeah. MA says coyotes keep my cat population down. Donkeys and llamas also kill coyotes. So there you go. Yeah, I've heard that donkeys are kind of underrated.
Donkeys are coyote killers?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that they. I'm getting out of my depth here, but I've heard rumors that there are families or operations that'll keep a donkey around just because it kind of regulates the grounds. You can put donkeys in with other
with the
animal
killing
species
or just the noise.
Oh, yeah.
Like that
too.
probably keep them away.
Maybe that too. And Horse Lake Ranch says, "Come on out." So maybe we'll make that a Real Talk patron event. If you support us on Patreon, we'll go out and we'll have a kegger at Horse Lake Ranch's place. We'll put a pig on the spit or something like that.
Yeah.
That might be pretty cool. We're getting suggestions. I like this. I see you, Bunny Slippers, in the chat, and others for who you'd like to see on that Real Talk Roundtable for talking about wildlife management. So you can be in touch with us anytime. This is not just a throwaway thing that we say. We a lot of times are on to subjects or booking specific guests because audience members say this person would be perfect for Real Talk. So shoot us an email anytime it occurs to you at talk@ryanjesperson.com. I love this. Justin says donkeys will protect herds against coyotes and foxes very well. Apparently they have a hatred for coyotes and will stomp them into puddles. Okay.
Big week for animals on the show because we're going to be talking stampede later. So
well, rodeo in particular. We'll talk.
Yeah.
But of course, the timing of it is happening as we'll be heading into the second weekend of the Calgary
and already,
Stampede.
if you're an animal activist or someone who's against it, you've seen I think they're up to like 4 animals now, 3 in the chuck wagon, and I think that one video I'm sure everyone's seen, and that's the one especially PETA's been using of one of the calf's necks broken by one of the participants who wrang its neck. How they go out and they bring it down, and then you can see the crowd kind of like, oh, that animal's not moving anymore, and had to be euthanized.
So I've said I'll wear my heart on my sleeve on this one, and I'll sort of my cards on the table. I grew up watching rodeo. I love the rodeo. I love going to the rodeo. I love the chucks. I understand not everybody does. I understand a lot of people think it's barbaric. We're not like on purpose this week trying to like drive everybody into camps and get everybody fighting. But
we got to talk about it.
To talk about these things
once a year.
I think safe to say, based on our brief interaction off camera, that you and I probably feel a little bit differently about rodeo. If that's fair to say, and our guests on Friday do as well, so much so that they've written about it in a really neat feature, which we appreciate on Alberta Views. We're proud to partner with Alberta Views magazine, the magazine for engaged citizens. You can check it out online at albertaviews.ca. Of course, we've also told you that it's 50% off an annual subscription with the promo code AVRJ. And they've got their new issue out. It's the July-August issue, and in that, Aretha Van Herk out of Calgary and Camille Labchuk, who's been on the show before. She's a lawyer. She's an animal rights lawyer, basically, and an advocate. They argue for and against rodeo, and they kind of give the point-counterpoint kind of thing. So that's going to be our Friday roundtable. That'll be coming up on the 12th of July, so make sure you mark your calendars for that. In the meantime, we want to thank you for supporting this show and for participating in our conversation as we wrap, whether it's you in the live chat every morning, whether it is you supporting us on Patreon. You can find more on that at ryanjesperson.com, or telling your friends, or sharing our social media, following our accounts on Instagram, TikTok, and what's the other one, John? Oh yeah, Twitter. We appreciate all of that. Though whether you agree or disagree, can we all agree we're better off when we're talking about it? We'll do it all again tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson, executive